Hello, ladies and gentlemen, this is The Last Raider, and we are back with another video. And today we are back on Slave-1 in Star Wars, because Disney has come out there and pretty much done what I would have done the first time if they had worried about the name Slave-1. They finally come out and decided, hey, you know what, we're not going to call it Boba Fett Starship because they got roasted. So they finally went back, looked into canon, and found the model number of Boba Fett's ship and decided, well, we're going to, instead of naming it Slave-1, and instead of us just calling it Boba Fett Starship, we're going to call it the Fire Spray after the Fire Spray 31. And I mentioned this in a video back. You know, you can do this. You can call it Boba Fett's Fire Spray 31 if you want. It still doesn't have the ring and the tone to it. I think the problem is they're sitting here, and a lot of people are sitting there saying, oh, well, this would be like naming a class of starship the same thing, not realizing that that is what happens with starship. That's what happens with regular ships in the world. One, the Iowa class would be an Iowa class battleship, the Iowa, which also the Iowa class is also, I believe, the Wisconsin. I believe there's also the Wyoming and the Missouri. All three of those are Iowa classes. The first ship was the USS Iowa. The United States does name their flagships Enterprise, mostly. That is usually the name of the flagship of the United States almost all the time. And those are usually carriers, but there is a carrier that's named after it. Going even further than that, there is the Nimitz class. There is a USS Nimitz, and its basis is the Nimitz class. This has also been done in Star Trek. I've seen this one before too, where they say, "Oh, you know, that's like calling an Enterprise ship in Star Trek the Enterprise." I'm like, well, the Excelsior was an Excelsior class ship. So it's not something that isn't normally done. But there is something that has to be recognized, though, with rules of ship naming. The Fire Spray 31 was one of a group of prototype ships. In other words, the ship was named afterward because probably Boba Fett destroyed the original Fire Spray ship. The one that would be named Fire Spray if we're going on this notion right here. Bullcrap. Yeah, Boba Fett is probably, or Jango Fett, excuse me. Jango, I'm sorry, I'm kind of excited. I'm kind of pissed at this. I'm a little excited at the same time because I just realized my miniature for my X-Wing game is coming in, and it's one of them that is the original. If they change the X-Wing miniatures, this one will be not Boba Fett, not the Fire Spray 31. It will actually have the name Slave-1 on it. So, got that coming. But as I said, it's still kind of stupid on the part of Star Wars because they do, honestly, Jango Fett's story around Slave-1, I've mentioned this before in a video, and I should go into more detail on this in a future video sometime. But Jango Fett got his Fire Spray. It is actually a police cruiser, if you want to consider that. Doing this would be like if the news media I'm making this argument for the other side of the aisle, the people who would agree with it not being named Slave-1. This is my response to them. Jango Fett and Slave-1 would be like the media or some historian rewriting history. Say George Floyd beat the crap out of Derek Chauvin, stole his police car, and then went out and became a folk hero, renaming his car Ho-1 after he stole Derek Chauvin's vehicle. It's probably a bad analogy, but now imagine a group of white people coming along afterward and saying, oh, well, you know, Ho is kind of a slave term, and we don't really like that, so we're going to change George Floyd's vehicle and call it the Crown Vic, because that's the model of the vehicle that he stole. It's about the same type of stupidity. Really, Disney does not need to screw with anything, okay? Nostalgia does not have to be messed with. You just have to recreate it. And usually if you don't have to recreate it, you just have to continue it, and continue it with respect. the way the Star Wars sequel trilogy was run, it was not respectfully done. The main characters that everyone loved from the original trilogy, and who grew to love even more because of the prequel trilogy, which enhanced all of these characters and gave them more history and more backstory and whatnot, respectfully, were then disrespectfully screwed with. Admiral Akbar was killed like a putz. Han Solo was killed like a putz. Luke Skywalker was thoroughly humiliated, made completely out of his character, and then made to look like a putz. And nostalgia will not work. It's kind of like when Mel Gibson came out and did Passion of the Christ. And when he did it, there were all these supposedly biblical movies that came out. Well, problem was when Hollywood gets a hold of it, they want to modernize everything. And you don't have to modernize anything. I've told people before, you want an amazing action hero, and you want to do a biblical movie with an action hero, you would have to do King David. Now, some people say, well, what about Samson? No. Samson was nothing compared to King David. Samson may have had superhuman strength, but King David killed a giant at 7, was already in line, and had, by the king's word, his actions at the battle with Goliath earned him the hand of Michal, possibly the most beautiful woman in all of Israel at the time, and princess of the king, Saul. Not only did he earn her hand, but when he became older, in about his 20s, he refused to take her because he told Saul, I'm not worthy of her. Saul, in a moment where he was just really pissed off, plus Saul wanted to kill him because all the women would come out and say, oh, King Saul, the king has killed his thousands and David has killed his tens of thousands, which didn't work out very well when the king is a bit of an arrogant jerk. And that's what Saul was. He was kind of arrogant. But then afterward, Saul said, I'll tell you what, go circumcise 100 Philistines. David comes back and he circumcises 200 Philistines, brings back their foreskins, and I think like 2 carts, which means you're not going to circumcise a man while he's alive. That's not going to happen. You have to go kill him. And he went by himself and killed 200 of the enemy of Israel and brought back their foreskins as proof. So it was designed to be an impossible task. Later on, Saul got to a point where he hated him so much, he finally committed to just brutally killing him because he decided, you know what, nothing else has worked. Chased David out of the city. When David went to another city, to a temple, he asked for bread from the temple, and he said, and I also need a sword. And they said, we have no sword other than another one, and it's like no other sword in the land. And the interesting part is David held this sword for the rest of his time as an outlaw. He pretty much became a Robin Hood-like figure. Guys who were basically mostly people who just didn't like paying taxes, because not very many people had paid taxes for very long, up and just left and ran off into the wilderness. Imagine that nowadays. But basically he ends up defending these men and making a force out of them, and they end up becoming captains later on under his command. But he ends up serving this time with a sword that weighs 15 pounds. In other words, it was the sword of Goliath after he had taken it as a youth and cut off Goliath's head and returned with the head of Goliath and his sword to the king. David ends up wielding the sword of Goliath in the name of Israel afterward, which some were estimated that at the size that Goliath would have been, David's sword would have been somewhere within 5.5 to 6 foot long, meaning he would have had the largest sword on the battlefield. He literally was the alpha of alphas in Israel. I mean, you could make an amazing story about the man. Not only that, he had guys under his command that had their own stories. There were 3 of them, in fact. I think they killed over, I want to say somewhere within 30 to 40,000 men, just the 3 of them, after Israel had been overrun. And they did so because they overheard David saying, I wish I could drink from the well of Bethlehem. And so they went in, killed tens of thousands of men for a bucket of water for the king. If you listen to who these guys were, the Bible gives an amazing backstory. They found one guy, they found him in a cave, and he jumped down there with a bunch of starving lions, killed them, and was eating them. The other guy ended up fighting a 9-foot Egyptian and caught his spear and turned it back around, threw it, and killed the Egyptian with it. But But if you were to take that story there, David would be a punt. Things would not go right. They would. The problem is with the way the SJWs do stories, they completely F them up because they feel like they have to lower the standards of what was told in the story, and they don't realize the heroics, the crazy tales. That's what makes the story interesting. It's one of the reasons why some people will listen to a liar, because a liar will embellish a story to the point, will embellish whatever he's saying to the point where it's fantastical. It's somewhat entertaining to listen to. You know it's bullcrap, but it's entertaining to listen to as this guy talks about it, because what he talks about is unbelievable anyway, but it's entertaining to listen to at the same time. So unless the guy's lying to you and screwing you out of money, most people will entertain a liar for a little bit, and SJWs have not learned this. It's the same reason SJWs don't know how to meme. They'll sit there and they'll put this big old long text and everything where they have to put an encyclopedia of everything, and it's like, that's what is the meme where Obi-Wan has got the high ground and he says, "It's over, Anakin. I have the left can't meme," and Anakin gives off a paragraph and Obi-Wan goes, "I'm not reading that." Like, it's if you have to explain the joke, it wasn't funny. Okay, that's the thing, or the person was too stupid to get the joke. As I've said before, humor is a thinking man's game. But as far as I'm concerned, it's going to be Slave-1. If I can, I'm going to see if I can get a guy to model paint, because I want to customize my Slave-1 miniature. And I may put this on Twitter if I can find someone who will paint it, who can paint small stuff. But I want either a Twi'lek in Princess Leia garb, or Princess Leia herself in the Slave Leia garb, with the chain going up to Boba Fett's cockpit from release, and then Slave-1 down the side, like tattooed on the side of her thigh or something. I think that would be a pretty good, I think that would be a pretty cool customization for that, as I'm, kicking the crap out of my kid most of the time, because this is probably the ship I'm going to run the most in any game that me and my kid play. So, but anyway, tell me what y'all think, folks. I mean, don't you wish Disney would just shut up and leave stuff alone, or do you think there's probably a better name they could have named Boba Fett's ship or Slave-1 besides Boba Fett Starship or the Fire Spray? Tell me what you think in the comments. Also, be sure to check out the old video. I'll try to put the link to it in the description of where I talk about how Jango Fett got his ship and explain the backstory, because some people who watched that original video were telling me, hey, that's a pretty badass story about a ship. And it is a badass story. And I may eventually do a video on that more in depth into Slave-1 and explain how that all came about and everything, and go into more detail of what Boba Fett did, or Jango Fett did. But anyway, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Hit the bell for notification if you're new to the channel. And as always, stay safe, stay frosty. See you guys in the next video. Bye-bye now.